Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about binding here. What I have is a couple examples. The first example here is the collar that you see on this particular T-shirt. This is a continuous piece, a continuous straight piece of pattern piece that has a rib fabric applied to it. I've sewn this has been sewn into place. It has been mitered in the front to give it this V-neck view, this V-neck appearance, and I have selected the pattern piece in the 2D window and increased the additional thickness rendering. I made it 2, which is a little bit thick, but it gives us a good example of the difference between the regular fabric and the fabric around the rib fabric that we need to see a difference in so that it looks like binding. The other option for binding is that we can place a binding under or above a seam by drawing around the seam on our sleeve hem here. I double click to finish. I can also tell this to be the particular fabric that I want it to be, rib 2x2, and I could also dictate that this be on the outside rather than the inside. And just for good measure, I will make it 1/2 inch thick. Okay, as we can see, my trim is on the bias, and it is over the top of my sleeve. Finally, we're going to put in a sleeve trim here that is uh, folded around the edge of the sleeve. What I have done is I created a pattern piece, which is length is the same length as the internal line. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a little bit of fullness to my pattern piece using the fullness line tool. I want to add fullness to the line to this side of the pattern piece for this particular technique. I'm only going to add a 1/2 inch. I'm going to make this 12.75 inches so that it curves a little bit in the same similar direction as the internal line that is in our pattern piece. Then I am going to shift select the 2 segments on the outside of our pattern pieces, the long segments, and I'm going to say distribute internal line between segment. This is going to split my pattern piece into basically 2 pieces. The width is 1 inch. It's going to split it into 1/2 inch pieces, and that is the difference that this internal line has been offset from the edge of my pattern piece. I am then going to segment sew the top curved edge to the internal line, noting that this has turned my seam. I am then going to sew the internal line to the hem of the sleeve. Next, I'm going to select this pattern piece and I'm going to tell it to superimpose over. This then places this over the top of my sleeve. I'm going to simulate so that it lies flat. Now I'm going to sew the 2 ends of this piece together so that we can see it sewn together here on the sleeve itself. To help with the detail here, I'm going to select this pattern piece. I'm going to decrease the particle distance to 5, and I'm going to decrease the collision distance to 1 so that this will be a high resolution piece. Finally, I'm going to strengthen this, and I'm going to simulate for good measure. Now that we have our pattern piece in place, I'm going to use the fold arrangement tool. I'm going to select this internal line and fold this under. Simulate it real quick to see that it stays. And then finally, I'm going to sew this under this line here that is underneath to the internal line so that those two can be sewn together at the same place, noting that the end is turned. Okay? When I simulate, this will then lie pretty flat. I can turn off the unstrengthen to see how this improves with it being just the regular fabric. It is still a little curved here. I can affect that by selecting the fold line here and setting the fold angle all the way down to 0 now that this is in place. And then also by, if I would like to get a crisper edge here on the fold, by turning on fold rendering. And that piece, those pieces now are sewn as a traditional pattern piece to give you a two-sided binding on the sleeve.